Good morning. There has been a it's always interesting when priests reach out to me because I'm always surprised when they do this. But we have I'm going to bring to you today a letter written by a priest who specifically asked that I present it to you, and I'll put the print version up on my website at returntotradition.org for the show notes there here minutes after this live stream is done. I don't usually do a post there on Sundays, but we'll be putting one up today. This is a priest who has written articles for Rorate Caeli in the past, and I'll actually give you one of his short articles also from there, just so you can get an idea of this priest. He is doing this publicly, meaning he's identifying his name and the diocese he's writing this from. This is an open challenge to bishops to resist Francis and what he's doing to the church, specifically in the form of the liturgy, the banning of the traditional mass. The priest is Father Donald Closter. He's from the Diocese of Bridgeport. And I want you to understand, when priests do this, they take a huge risk. So I going to present this to him, and I actually double-checked to make sure that he wanted his name out there and everything, and he said yes. So I'm going to bring to you his short public letter and then a short article he wrote 3 or 4 years ago for Rorate Caeli to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. Thanks, by the way, Colleen, for becoming a channel member. I have going to use this as my reminder to people that channel members through the YouTube channel, that join button feature, get us free super chat once a month. Please use that. It's a perk. I mean, you're paying for it, so please use it. It makes it so that I get a message like that one that I can pop up here and I can answer your question and not have to hunt through for interesting questions necessarily from other people. Yours gets priority. So that having been said, before we do that though, I'm going to show you this bit of news that is not the most joyful thing. We have confirmation now that the Francis's declaration on apparitions are coming. This broke, I believe, yesterday, on 4th of May, from Michael Haynes, who is a LifeSite News journalist. He said, Pope Francis today met with Cardinal Fernandez and Father Armando Mateo of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith doctrinal section today, or there'd be the DDF doctrinal section today, ahead of the anticipated release of the new document on visions and Marian apparitions and all the rest. And this is of a picture from their meeting earlier in the year. This is not a picture from that meeting. But yes, that they met yesterday. So just to give you an idea, this is their confirmation that the document is coming, and we can expect that I expect this document on the 13th of May, because their track record has been and always will be, seems to be, that they release these documents on Marian feast days or on days that are on other major feast days. They released Fiducia Supplicans on a feast day from the pre-1954 calendar that was a feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when you actually look at that feast day and what it stands for, the release of Fiducia Supplicans on that day is not an accident, and it's very kind of creepy and cringe-inducing that they did it that way. They released the clarification of Traditionis Custodes on that exact day, actually 2 years prior. Traditionis Custodes was released on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. I have a whole video on the Pachamama debacle, on various other Pachamama-related things, and how almost all the things they did, the issuing commemorative coins, public statements Francis gave later, all this stuff on Marian feast days. It's a track record they have. For whatever reason, they like to do that on those days. So keep this in mind. I think that's an interesting context. I have the letter that he wrote, not in my email because I don't want to expose his email address or anything. I put the text of it into a Google Drive document so I can just share it with you here. Note that it is dated the 18th of February. I didn't ask about that about the date, other than that's when he probably wrote it, but I almost wonder if other outlets refuse to publish this. So here we are. There's a letter from Father Donald Closter, and then I'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll talk about we'll go over an older article he did for Rorate Caeli. So, to the Catholic bishops. The truth of our much lamented position as the church is in the sacramental records. This is specifically found in the change of the priest to faithful ratio over the last 54 years. This ratio is as telling as it gets. Obviously, the lower the priest to faithful ratio, the more the mystical body of Christ is served. The larger the ratio, the harder it becomes the faithful to go to Mass, have their confessions heard, or to have a meaningful contact with priests at all. In 1970, the year that the Novus Ordo Mass was introduced, we had 59,192 USA priests and around 52 million Catholics, or about a ratio of 1 priest to 881 lay faithful. Today, we have around 28,000 priests and 72 million Catholics, or about a ratio of 1 to 201 priest to 2,571 lay faithful. We have 1/3 the priests that we had right after the unexpected innovation of the Novus Ordo Mass. In the 5+ decades since 1970, the ratio of priest to faithful has never gotten better. It keeps cratering. The Catholic Church is in dire straits. In the 1950s, we had approximately 80% of our Catholics attending Sunday Mass. In 1980, it was about 50%. By 1990, it was around 40%. And by 2000, it was about 33%. By 2019, it had fallen to 20%. Currently, 2024, a diocese is fortunate to count 8% of those who identify as Catholics attending Sunday Mass. No company lets its main product keep tanking year to year, much less decade over decade. The bishops, as stewards of the Holy Faith, should intuitively reevaluate the consequences of the changes in the Holy Mass. There have been 2 important studies on the traditional Latin Mass, 2019 and 2020. These traditional Latin Mass faithful live in the exact same society as their Novus Ordo Mass fellow Catholics. The following numbers in all things Catholic Church related are not due to the societal, moral, and theological rot. The TLM faithful go to Mass at a 97% clip and give 5% times more money per capita. These figures were reviewed and verified by Dr. Froley, who ran CARA, a National Church Research Center at Georgetown University, for many years. You as bishops can't say anymore that no one wants the traditional Latin Mass. That's what we heard time and again when I was in the seminary in the early 1990s. Not only do people want the traditional Mass, they know it is the lone protective cover from the assaults of Satan. Every other religious practice is being demolished. Practicing Christians, or any modern religion, is ceding to a non-practice or non-type of atheistic godlessness. To me, it is nefarious to insinuate that the Novus Ordo Mass can even exist in the future. The Novus Ordo Mass is stuck in a 1960s time warp. It neither resembles our traditional liturgy nor does it remotely approach any eternal reality test. Some bishops believe that an oriented Novus Ordo in Latin is the answer. They want to coax or massage a belief that the Novus Ordo Mass in Latin will satiate the TLM faithful. Not so, as it is spiritually a far weaker imitation. I'm going to pause here. This is a Catholic priest saying this. A diocesan Catholic priest. This is not an SSPX priest. This is a diocesan Catholic priest saying this publicly, who has identified himself and his diocese by name. The problem is that this idea has already been tried and failed. I will say that the Novus Ordo in Latin is far better than the Novus Ordo in the vernacular. However, it will just be a slower bleed. The Novus Ordo Mass in Latin has no upside growth, no vocations increase. It is still a breach of an over 1,930-year Holy Mass from the Apostles' tradition. Why on earth would a Catholic prelate allow growing traditional Latin Masses in his diocese to be canceled? What harm have these people done? Do they give too much to the collection? Do they get married too often? Do they come to Sunday Masses too regularly? Do they have too many Catholic children because they are not practicing the artificial barriers to being fruitful and multiplying? We know that 89% of normal Novus Ordo Missae attending women agree with the use of those barriers, and only 2% of traditional Latin Mass women agree with it. The overarching mentality of those barriers in the Novus Ordo speaks volumes as to the atrophy it engenders. These Masses seem to produce 2 different religions. A sitting prelate of the Catholic Church is not a vicar of Rome. He is the authority in his diocese for his faithful. He is the one who should decide what is spiritually beneficial for his faithful. Are almost all of you afraid of the Roman Curia? If you were removed like Bishop Strickland, so be it. St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that obedience to tyrannical demands is not tenable. If enough bishops resist, they have great power staying united together in a group of virtuous stalwarts. In 16th century England, only one bishop out of 30 resisted King Henry VIII. St. John Fisher stood up for marriage in the Latin Mass of the Ages. In 1569, the nobles of Northumberland fought against Queen Elizabeth I in favor of the traditional Latin Mass and against the English Anglican liturgy. Our exorcists are repeatedly telling us that the demons hate and fear Latin. I would hope you would neither be a willing nor negligent accomplice to the powers of hell. Many faithful have run their own businesses for years. They would never deny their customers their best-selling product. That would be economic self-destruction. Seeing the TLMs around the country being arbitrarily shut down looks like spiritual self-destruction to me. Do you as a bishop want to spend the final years of your episcopacy presiding over the continuing hemorrhaging of our faithful? Do you listen to its history of fruitfulness? Do you have eyes to see and ears to hear? Are we only the segment of the church that gets no paternal affection and care? The fruitfulness of any mass should attest to its veracity or mendacity. The vocations of the priesthood in traditional parishes is 6 to 7 times greater depending on the diocese. To date, I have been assigned in 5 parishes that offered both masses on the same Sunday schedule. The Novus Ordo Mass had exponentially far more attendees than the traditional Latin Mass at every parish. The vocations results were 15 traditional Mass to 0 Novus Ordo Mass. In my 28 years as a priest, I have had 29 spiritual directees who have discerned the priesthood or the religious life, 28 traditional Mass and 1 Novus Ordo. 7 of the traditional Mass left formation before their final vows or ordinations. The 1 Novus Ordo was ordained a priest and then left the priesthood. So it's 21 traditional Mass to 0 Novus Ordo Mass vocations still continuing in their formation or vows. Please, any bishop reading this, prove to me that I am wrong about the negative growth of the Novus Ordo and the positive growth of the traditional Mass where it is not indiscriminately smashed. Let them stand side by side. Let the faithful decide. Please stop aiding anyone, perhaps yourself, who's putting his finger on the scale to his own benefit. There should be no place for egoism, bishops who are jealous of the success of the traditional Mass. No place for an experimental Mass that has not worked. No place for the weakness, we'll have to be careful how we say this here, the liturgy of the Novus Ordo as opposed to the masculine liturgy of the TLM that has undermined the Son of Man incarnate on the altar. Why does it appear that the lone faithful sector of the church is being ignored? I once heard a man say that he didn't care if the priest spoke Martian as long as the holy faith was bolstered. The Latin Rite is the name of our Western church. Latin reverses the curses of the Tower of Babel. It gives us one universal language. It seems to me that we need more unity, not the squelching of the spirit of our forefathers. Signed very publicly by Father Donald Closter, Diocese of Bridgeport. This reminds me, by the way, I've done a video on this some time ago. Pope Pius XII once, I think it was when he was still Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, he once gave his thoughts on the message of Fatima. And the way he described it was that he was worried about Sister Lucia's message of Fatima in light of the voices in the 1930s who were advocating for changing the liturgy, the self-destruction of the church through the changes to the liturgy. That was in the 1930s. The same voices doing that then, who 30 years later would be participating in the council that would eventually change the liturgy. Stephen says they probably use Marian feast days because the evil ones hate our Blessed Lady, and so they are falling in line with his wishes. That might be in there. Is the text moving? I mean, yeah, because I was scrolling down the screen, Michael. AM asks for prayers for Panama. They have their political contest happening today. Please pray for them and their country that they make some good choices. I want to Raven Ray says, say goodbye to any promotions or continued support from his bishop, but brave to speak up. I don't know much about the bishop of Bridgeport. It's one thing I didn't do before doing this. I'm going to give you another thing he wrote to give you an idea. Again, this is an op-ed he wrote for Barate Celi. This was back in 2019. And as you'll see, it's not exactly long. He's been sounding this alarm in the church for 5 years at least. So, guest op-ed by a priest, how a tiny minority of heterodox lay people can ruin Catholic restoration in a parish. It only takes a dirty half dozen. by Father Donald Closter of Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm guessing it's a parish of St. Mary. 5 years ago, we may have been reassigned, for all I know. About 10 years ago now, I was reading an article by a Protestant minister who was chronicling the inordinate power of a few, 5 to 6 individuals, to get rid of, fired, or reassigned any clergy member or parish employee. Time and again, he said he'd witnessed even the pastor removed at the hands of certain well-motivated members of the church in question. Now, let's pause here. Remember that story about Michigan I covered last week? It was like 5 to 6 people who organized that too. Bear that in mind. These small groups tend to stick together through the process of ousting their target, even though previously they may have never been very close or even known one another. They have a common goal, and they know that if they stay focused, the vast majority of the church membership will not get involved. Even worse, the small group knows they just need to invest more time into their ouster plans than the average parishioner plans to spend in a limited and or short-lived defense. Even if the clergyman or the church employee is very well liked and does their job well, it often matters not. Once the smear campaign ball gets rolling, it tends to be almost unstoppable. Our society has been well conditioned to listen to a cleverly organized advertising campaign. If the message is slick enough, it usually wins the opinions of the most influential and or the people with the most say in the parish. Be wary of individuals in the parish that never seem to be satisfied unless they are part of a controversy or conflict. They spread their poison with impunity. Alone, they are somewhat harmless, but if they pack up like a group of formerly domesticated dogs, they can tear any church membership into pieces. For Catholics, we must be sure that we surround ourselves with other practicing Catholics who have a good prayer life. We should be on the alert to come to the aid of anyone being unjustly treated or unfairly censured. The only way to combat the tyranny of the few is to make sure there is a big network of Catholics who will speak out and act upon the defense of holiness. The insurance of a well spiritually protected parochial structure. The moral majority need to realize that they cannot afford to be outmotivated nor shouted down. We live in an age where it seems an inordinate amount of individuals are promoting their pet protests. The parish should be a place where we rally around the catechism of the Catholic Church, without the few modern addenda. A place where the solid inheritance of the apostles and fathers of the church is given an elevated platform. A place of refuge against the tide of secularism and the politically correct. A place where every parishioner knows that the faith and morals of the ages will be defended to our ultimate end. Currently, the great majority of bishops and pastors only fear two things. They fear financial loss. They also fear bad publicity, or more adroitly, maligned optics. They tend to robotically mirror the very secular institution components that should be aggressively resisted at every turn. We become what we advocate, what we tolerate, and what vices we fail to arrest. The federal government, for example, is an awful mentor, and yet the Catholic Church hierarchy imitates too many of its godless policies to no logical end. These immoral decisions filter down to the parochial level to our demise. The great irony is that the hierarchy of the church ever grew a collective spine, or could insert something here much more crude, the money worries and the false fear of bad publicity would take care of themselves. God always takes care of his own and punishes the disobedient. That previous sentence is repeatedly emphasized in sacred scripture if anyone even has the slightest impetus to absorb what they are reading. It is my hope that you neither have 5 to 6 chief agitators, nor will your parish allow them to metastasize. If there be a latent group of agitators waiting for the ideal conditions to manifest themselves, I pray that they amend their ways or leave the parish of their own volition. It is likely neither your bishop nor your pastor who will act to assist you should powerful agitators appear within your parish complex. Strong, faithful parishioners are needed to repel any attack from the inside by unified, directed prayer, firm fraternal correction, and mighty collective penances. Again, it's along the same lines as what he wrote in this letter that I'm the only one who has, that he sent to me. Again, which will be the text of which will be posted here in a few minutes at returntotradition.org for those who want to read it for yourself. And that's an interesting letter to read 5 years later in light of what happened up in Michigan recently. And I remember also right around that same time reporting on a story from Portland, Oregon, where a new pastor came in and he made the mass much more solemn. And then Novus Ordo Mass, by the way, wasn't implementing the traditional Mass by any stretch. It was just he started offering the Mass in a way more befitting of the Mass and of the liturgy. And he started taking the focus of the parish and reorienting it towards actual worship, where that parish had previously just been essentially a social services provider with a Mass offered on Sunday. He he flipped the focus while still providing the much needed social services to that very poor community. He made sure the parish was first and foremost a parish. And the result was some lady in Portland, Oregon, my old hometown, actually interrupted the mass with protests and signs and the whole 9 yards. I couldn't believe it when I reported it, but 5 years later, nothing surprises me anymore. Again, I'll post the links to both of those in the show notes here in just a few minutes. Any thoughts in the comments here before I shift to one last thing? Will be the final call that I do about the Give, Send, Go, not for anything else that's closed. This is if you donated in any way through the mail, by the way, including or any other way, please email me some statement or like a screenshot of your receipt or something with the private information taken out, and I'll add you to my patron supporter early access list, which is something I don't think I've ever edited. So I just want to thank everybody who's, in general, these are also, just thank people send me, but thank people for it. I have this rule that I don't never mention names because we live in a time now where there are self-described Catholics who will report people to their bishop because of their participation in this stuff. So I do want to thank people though for their support. To the retired couple who sent a donation and gave me a letter with their name, proper pronunciation of their name. I do thank you for that. I got a chuckle out of it, and partially because I'm well known for not being able to pronounce people's names properly. It is a pet peeve of mine. It really is, because I'll look up a pronunciation of a name online, get it in my head, and then I'll still say it wrong. It's almost to the point where I want to use like an online robotic kind of thing to say, and here's Bishop, hit the button, and then it'll just be this, properly pronounced name that's clearly not me saying it. That's how bad it is. If you have a hard time understanding that, think about how I felt in high school trying to take Spanish and then later Japanese. Let's see. Catherine says, good morning, folks. If the traditional mass goes underground, priests need help. The traditional mass needs consecrated altars. Help your priests obtain portable altar stones. And there are people online who can help you with finding those sources too. Bug Hall comes to mind. You can most easily contact him on Twitter. He's building a home chapel on his homestead, so he can help you with places where you can possibly find those kinds of things. Joe says the priest, Father Kloster, is brave. I have too many thoughts to type. Again, he issued this letter telling people to disobey Traditionis Custodes, basically telling the bishops to. Publicly saying this while being a diocesan priest, identifying him by himself by his name and his diocese. I expect that some people will probably at least have some snide things to say on their blogs and on their channels about this. All right, folks, if there's nothing left to say, this is a Sunday, so check out the reflection video that's coming up today. It's from a source that I used to use more regularly than I do lately, and that wasn't on purpose. It just kind of happened. But on the subject of demonic temptations. So you'll want to check that out, trust me. But thanks always for tuning in. And as always, pray for the church. And as Sheila says, prayers for all of our priests. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.